Hello there, my sleepy fellows. Welcome to another cozy, magical tale. Tonight, we begin a story wrapped in gentle mystery, where whispers of wonder shimmer just beyond the surface of the ordinary. It is a tale of reflection, quite literally, and a Hogwarts you may not have seen before. A story that drifts slowly, like candlelight on still water, inviting you to rest, explore, and perhaps discover something quietly enchanting behind the familiar. So settle in, pull your blanket close, and allow the world of magic to unfold softly around you. It all began on one of those evenings that felt like they had been dipped in gold. The sun had nearly set behind the hills surrounding Hogwarts, casting long, sleepy shadows across the castle's ancient stone walls. The sky was painted in warm honey and lilac tones, and every window pane flickered with reflections of a world winding down. Inside the castle, the corridors were unusually quiet. Most students were in the Great Hall, enjoying the early autumn feast, pumpkin stew, warm buttered rolls, golden apple cider, and laughter echoing like soft bells. But just a few corners away from the busy tables, in a lesser-known hallway near the third-floor charms classroom, everything was still. The corridor curved like a gentle question mark, its old portraits sound asleep in their frames. The lanterns lining the stone walls hummed gently, their flames dancing slowly behind frosted glass. A large, full-length mirror stood near the far end, one not quite magical, not quite ordinary either. It had no name, no carvings, no obvious spellwork on its surface, just an old, dusty frame with a shimmer that seemed slightly too alive. And in this quiet place, where time felt slower and magic more willing to whisper, something unseen was waiting. Not urgently, not impatiently, just waiting, like a library book left open on a desk, hoping someone would return to finish the story. This tale doesn't begin with a bang, or a spell, or a grand discovery. It begins with softness, with a reflection, and with the gentle feeling that not all glass shows you just yourself. Sometimes, if the light is just right, and your heart is quiet enough, you might see something more. And if you enjoy gentle tales of hidden doors, sleepy mysteries, and softly glowing magic, consider staying with us a while longer. Like the mirror in that corridor, this channel holds many more reflections waiting to be found. A like, a subscribe, a whispered comment. Those are spells of their own in this quiet corner of the magical world. So, as our story begins, let the world outside drift away. Let the soft glow of lanterns guide your thoughts, and let us gently step into a story where Hogwarts hides a second face, seen only in the glass, the one that never speaks, but always watches. Are you ready? Let's begin. The soft hum of lanterns in the corridor gave way to the light creak of footsteps. They were careful steps, hesitant, yet curious, and they belonged to Luna Lovegood, a fifth-year Ravenclaw with eyes that seemed to float just slightly behind the present moment. Luna had a way of walking through Hogwarts as though it were a dream she didn't want to wake from, her gaze always finding the corners others missed. She wore a long knitted cardigan over her school robes, something she had charmed to smell faintly of lavender and warm parchment. Her wand was tucked into one of her many inner pockets, beside a collection of polished stones, a quill that drew in tiny loops even when idle, and a folded napkin holding a single sugar quill. Her bag was slung across her shoulder, decorated with buttons that jingled like sleepy bells when she moved. She wasn't wandering without reason. Luna often came to this hallway when the world felt too loud, not because anything was particularly wrong, just because she liked how quiet the stones were here, and because she had once seen, in the mirror at the end of the corridor, something she couldn't quite explain. Not herself, not exactly, but herself in a place where the moonlight was silver green and the castle windows glowed from the inside of dreams. It hadn't frightened her, it had simply waited. Today, she had brought someone with her. Walking 2 steps behind, slightly puzzled and adjusting his glasses, was Neville Longbottom. A kind-hearted Gryffindor in his 6th year, Neville had grown more confident with each passing term, though he still preferred the quiet company of plants to loud conversations. His satchel held a half-read book on magical herbology and a small notebook filled with pressed leaves, each labeled in tidy script. "I still don't understand what you mean by reflected differently," Neville said softly, blinking at the mirror ahead as they reached the end of the corridor. Luna tilted her head, her hair catching the lantern light like gossamer. "You have to look without expecting to see. It's not about your face, it's about the feeling." Neville smiled despite himself. He had learned not to argue with Luna. Her oddities had a strange consistency, and more often than not, they led to something quietly wonderful, or at the very least, interesting. The 2 of them stood in front of the glass. The frame was cool to the touch, carved with faded swirls that hinted at enchantment long ago. Their reflections looked back at them calmly. But if you lingered, if you really watched, sometimes the Luna in the glass blinked at a different moment, and sometimes the Neville in the mirror turned his head a fraction slower than the one standing there. It was subtle, gentle, like a secret stretching in its sleep. And for these 2 quiet souls, that was all the invitation they needed. Luna and Neville stood before the glass longer than either of them realized. Time had a way of loosening its grip in this corridor, as though the stones themselves preferred not to rush. The lanterns flickered once, then settled into a lower glow, bathing the mirror in warm amber light. At first, nothing seemed different. Neville adjusted his grip on the strap of his satchel and cleared his throat quietly. "It just looks like us," he said, not disappointed, only thoughtful. Luna didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, her shoes barely making a sound against the stone floor. She raised one hand, not to touch the glass, but to hover just a breath away from it, as though feeling for warmth from a sleeping creature. "That's because you're looking with your eyes," she said gently. "Try looking with the part of you that notices when a room feels happier after everyone's gone to bed." Neville frowned, then smiled faintly. He had no idea what that meant, but he closed his eyes anyway. He took a slow breath in, then out, letting the quiet of the corridor settle into his chest. And that was when it happened. The air shifted, not sharply, not suddenly, but like the moment before a candle flame steadies. Neville opened his eyes. The reflection had changed. The Luna in the glass was still there, still calm, still wearing her cardigan and dreamy expression, but behind her reflection, the corridor was no longer the same. The stone walls looked smoother, brighter, as if newly built. The lanterns were different too, hanging lower and glowing with a pale silvery light Neville had never seen before. And the windows. The windows in the reflection were tall and arched, just like Hogwarts windows, but beyond them was a sky of deep twilight blue, scattered with unfamiliar constellations. The stars looked closer somehow, as if they were listening. Neville's breath gusset, but not in fear, in recognition, the way one feels when stepping into a greenhouse long abandoned but still alive. "Luna," he whispered, is that Hogwarts?" Luna smiled, slow and serene. "Yes," she said, "but not the one we're standing in." As she spoke, the reflection shifted again. The Neville in the glass moved, but not in perfect sync. He turned his head slightly before the real Neville did, his expression softer, calmer, like someone who had already learned something important. Then the sound came, not a bang, not a crack, just a low, resonant hum, like distant bells carried on evening wind. The mirror rippled the surface of the glass, no longer reflected light the way glass should. Instead, it shimmered gently, as if it were made of still water reflecting the sky. Neville instinctively stepped back, but Luna remained where she was, her eyes bright with quiet delight. "It's opening," she murmured, only a little. The hum deepened, and the reflected corridor slowly revealed more detail. Neville could see students walking past, but their robes were different, longer, softer in color. Their voices, though silent, seemed peaceful. No rushing, no tension, just movement without hurry. A Hogwarts without urgency. Without thinking, Neville lifted his hand. The moment his fingers touched the glass, warmth spread through his palm. Not heat, but comfort. Like sunlight through a window on a winter morning, images bloomed across the surface. A great hall, with candles drifting lower, their flames dim and steady. Staircases that moved more slowly, pausing as if to let people admire the view. Classrooms, where students lingered long after lessons ended, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to stay. Neville felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he hadn't had words for before. "What is this place?" he asked quietly. Luna rested her hand beside his, not touching him, but close enough to feel shared warmth. "I think," she said, "it's Hogwarts as it might be when no one is trying to prove anything." The mirror hummed again, softer now, and a new image formed. A version of the corridor they stood in, but empty. No students, no lanterns, just moonlight and quiet. And in the center of that reflected corridor stood another mirror, identical to the one before them, a mirror looking back. Neville's heart beat slowly, steadily. "It's like it's watching us too." Luna nodded. "All reflections watch, but not all of them judge." The glass shimmered once more, and then, very gently, words appeared across the surface, not carved, not written in ink, but formed of soft light, as though the mirror itself were breathing them into existence. Not all worlds are meant to be entered, some are meant to be remembered. Neville read the words twice, letting them settle. So it's not a doorway, he asked. No, Luna said. It's a conversation. The hum faded almost completely, leaving behind a peaceful stillness. The reflected Hogwarts began to soften, its details blurring like a dream upon waking. The stars dimmed, the unfamiliar sky faded. Soon, the mirror showed only Luna and Neville once more, ordinary reflections. But something had changed. Neville lowered his hand and looked at his fingers as though expecting them to glow. They didn't, but they felt different, lighter. I feel like I've been somewhere, he said, even though I didn't go anywhere. Luna's smile deepened. That's how the best journeys work. They stood there for a while longer, saying nothing. The corridor seemed content to let them be. Eventually, footsteps echoed faintly from far away, other students heading back to their dormitories. The moment passed, but it did not vanish. As they turned to leave, Neville glanced back once more. For just a second, no longer than a blink, he thought he saw the reflected Neville lift a hand in farewell. And then the mirror was only glass again. Quiet, waiting, not finished, just patient. As the misty hush of the day stretched lazily into twilight, whispers of magic stirred once again in the corner of the wandmaker's shop. Ollivander had returned from an errand, his hands dusty with the oldness of Diagon Alley's cobblestone secrets, and the shop dimmed into its familiar cocoon of quiet. Dust floated in amber shafts of dying light as the bells above the door gave a soft jingle. But this time, the magic didn't come from the doorway. It began with a thrum, a gentle sound, like a heartbeat echoing from wood grain and velvet-lined boxes. Hermione had stayed behind, unable to shake the feeling that something unfinished lingered within these walls. She wandered deeper into the back of the shop, her fingers brushing gently along stacks of wand boxes stacked taller than her. Each box was like a sleeping story, and then something called. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't even words, just a pull. Her steps turned instinctive, quiet as breath, as though following a trail only she could feel. The sound seemed to resonate from the floorboards themselves, a rhythm pulsing through ancient wood, tap, 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 like a distant echo, like something waking. She followed it into the old testing chamber, a room no longer in use, sealed off behind a tapestry that shimmered slightly when her hand brushed it aside. The air in the room was thick with age, filled with forgotten wood shavings, parchment, and oils once used to polish elder bark or unicorn hair. She stepped in, and as her foot crossed the threshold, the lights dimmed further. Suddenly, boxes began to creak open on their own. One by one, dozens of them, their lids gently unfastened, like tiny creatures blinking awake after centuries of sleep. Wand after wand lifted into the air, not shooting sparks or flaring into flames, but hovering silently, watching her, observing, measuring something beyond age or talent. Hermione gasped, spinning in a slow circle, caught in the center of what felt like an ancient magical trial. And then, it appeared, the same wand from before, the one that never chose. It floated toward her with slow, deliberate grace, the aged wood glowing softly now. But instead of presenting itself to her, it spun gently in place and began to drift past her shoulder, not toward her, but back, deeper into the shop, almost asking her to follow. The room trembled slightly as she obeyed. Behind another thick curtain lay a secret compartment, one even Ollivander hadn't mentioned. A hidden vault of wands that had never found a match. Some were twisted unnaturally, others bore strange markings or wand cores that had long since gone extinct. The air buzzed with restless old enchantments. Some wands shimmered and turned away as she entered, while others seemed to twitch as if afraid. But the wand that led her remained steady, steady and determined. At the heart of the vault sat a pedestal, and on that pedestal, untouched by dust or time, was a box. She opened it. Inside was not a wand, but a scroll. Carefully, she unrolled it. The parchment felt older than Hogwarts itself. In golden ink, a history unfolded before her eyes, the story of the wand that never chose again. It had once belonged to a powerful witch, long before the founding of the 4 houses. A quiet soul who had studied wand lore when magic was still wild and unshaped. She had poured her own magic into the wand, not to amplify power, but to ensure safety. The wand had been charmed never to bond again until it found a soul as devoted to balance and protection as its first owner had been. And in centuries since, it had waited, watching wizards and witches rise and fall. Brilliant ones, ambitious ones, brave ones, kind ones, but never quite the right one. Until now, Hermione stepped closer, the wand still hovering before her, its glow gentle, patient. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she whispered, "I don't need you to choose me." The glow deepened, as if warmed by her honesty. "I just want to understand." And for the first time in its long life, the wand responded. It began to hum, a soft melody, not in sound, but in magic. The same note Hermione had felt in her bones the moment she stepped into the vault. It pulsed through her like a lullaby wrapped in ancient runes. And then it did something no wand had ever done in her presence. It laid itself in her open hands, but not with a spark or a dramatic flare. It simply rested, as if relieved, as if it, too, had waited a long time to be understood. Just then, Ollivander appeared at the entrance of the vault, his eyes wide with disbelief. "That room," he said softly. "I had forgotten it existed. My great-grandfather sealed it. He said it wasn't meant to be opened unless the wands called out themselves." Hermione turned to him, the wand still in her hands. "It led me here." Ollivander stepped inside slowly, reverently, his eyes moving across the ancient boxes. "These wands are not unfinished," he murmured. "They are too perfect, too specific. They waited not for mastery, but for alignment, a soul that matches not in power, but in harmony." He paused, looking at her. "That wand may never cast spells like your others. It may never duel, or stun, or shout, but it will remember. It will protect what matters. Hermione nodded, eyes misty, and as they left the vault, the lid slowly closed behind them, not with finality, but with the peace of a chapter closed gently, ready to be opened again only by the right hand at the right moment. Back in the testing room, the other wands that had risen now settled back into their boxes with a quiet shuffling sound. One by one, the lids fell shut like eyelids finding sleep. The wand that never chose again had whispered a story through silence, and it had been heard. The days that followed felt wrapped in soft enchantments, as if the castle itself was quietly watching Rose's every move. She no longer wandered the halls aimlessly, but moved with gentle purpose, often with her book pressed close to her chest and the dormant wand always tucked safely away in her cloak. Though the wand still did nothing when touched by others, Rose found herself drawn to it more than ever, its silent presence somehow more comforting than unnerving. It was as if the wand knew something she didn't, like an unread chapter waiting patiently to be discovered. Each evening, Rose returned to the attic where she'd first found the wand. No longer did it feel like a place of forgotten things. With a few gentle cleaning charms and some careful rearrangement of the dusty shelves, it had become her private sanctuary. The room now held a few cushions, a soft blanket draped over an old armchair, and shelves partially cleared to reveal odd books, magical maps, and quietly humming magical instruments. Every time she entered, the air carried a faint warmth, as though the wand's presence subtly filled the space with a sleepy magic of its own. But there was still no answer, no sign, just the unchanging stillness of a wand that would not spark. And yet, something began to shift, not in the wand, but in the castle. The portraits she passed seemed to watch her with increased attentiveness. One day, a former herbology professor from a forgotten corridor painting whispered softly as Rose walked by, "The choice is not always made in haste." Another time, a kindly-looking witch in a portrait near the Hufflepuff common room tilted her head at Rose and said, "Not all magic begins with spells." These subtle encounters sent a tingle down her spine. Not fear, but wonder. Was the castle guiding her? One chilly afternoon, while walking near the covered courtyard, Rose heard a faint rustling behind a tapestry she had passed countless times. Curiosity piqued. She pulled the heavy fabric aside and found a hidden spiral staircase behind it, dusty, dimly lit, and clearly long forgotten. She hesitated only briefly before stepping in. Her footsteps echoed lightly as she descended into a part of the castle she had never seen before. At the bottom, she found a small, round chamber lit by a slow-turning enchanted lantern. A marble pedestal stood in the center, its surface layered in dust, but carved with runes that matched the ones faintly etched into her wand's wooden handle. Her breath caught as she gently placed the wand on the pedestal. A moment passed. Nothing happened. Then she whispered, "Why won't you choose?" As if stirred by the emotion in her voice, a soft golden shimmer flickered beneath the wand's tip, like a sleeping flame taking its first breath. The light didn't grow, nor did it vanish. It simply pulsed once, faint, but undeniable. Rose stood very still. It was the first sign. After weeks of wondering and wandering, the wand had responded, not with a spell, but with a whisper. From that moment on, she began to sense things more deeply. During her classes, spells she once struggled with began to feel more intuitive. Plants in herbology seemed to lean toward her touch. In charms, her wand, her usual school-assigned wand, worked more smoothly, but there was always a shadow of something greater she could feel just beyond reach, something waiting in the silent wand that stayed wrapped in velvet in her pocket. She started recording her dreams, and they began to shift. At first, she dreamt of the attic, quiet, unchanged, but soon the dreams showed her standing in candlelit halls lined with ancient portraits, or kneeling beside great oaks in the forbidden forest, or even speaking softly to stars that blinked back at her. And always in her hand, the silent wand glowed with a gentle light. Word spread slowly among her friends, though she hadn't told anyone. People began to say that Rose seemed different, not more powerful, not showier, but steadier, as though something inside her had aligned with a melody the rest of the world couldn't hear. Then one evening, just as the castle was settling into its dreamy hush, a light snow began to fall. Rose, drawn by a quiet tug she didn't quite understand, left the warmth of her common room and wandered toward the edge of the forbidden forest. She did not enter. She only stood there, gazing at the sleeping trees, snowflakes whispering against her cloak. From the shadows, a fox emerged, its fur dusted in snow, eyes bright and calm. It paused a few feet from her, then tilted its head as if to say, "You're close now." Rose didn't move. She only watched as the fox slowly circled and then vanished into the trees. When she looked down, her hand was on the silent wand without having realized she'd drawn it. The wand was glowing, faintly, not flickering like before, but glowing, a low, even light, like moonlight in a memory. She didn't cast a spell. She didn't even think of one. The wand was simply awake. That night, back in the attic, Rose unwrapped the wand again and placed it on her lap. "You were never broken," she whispered. "You were just waiting." And in that silence, a soft warmth bloomed, not in her hand, but in her chest. The warmth of being understood, the warmth of a connection forming not through force, but patience. She held the wand close and sat for hours, watching the snow fall softly beyond the attic window, the whole world wrapped in quiet. From that point on, the wand never glowed again in front of others, never sparked, never cast a spell. But Rose didn't mind, because it had chosen, it had spoken, not with fire or thunder, but with trust, a trust that magic could be quiet, that some connections weren't loud, and that sometimes being chosen wasn't about power, it was about being seen. And that kind of magic, Rose realized, was the most beautiful of all. As the soft weeks of winter deepened, Hogwarts entered one of its most serene states, a castle hushed in snowfall, its windows glowing faintly like distant memories. The world outside seemed to pause, and within those still moments, Rose found herself gently unfolding in ways even she hadn't expected. Though the wand remained quiet to the world, It had become an invisible companion, pulsing not with power, but presence. No one else knew of the second glow, the tender flicker of verve it had shared in her hand that night. And she kept it that way, protecting it like one would protect a quiet truth, not ready to explain something so intimate to anyone else. Instead of chasing recognition, Rose followed the slow pull of intuition. Her days were filled with small choices, ones that might have seemed ordinary, but which carried hidden weight. She spent more time in the old corners of Hogwarts, walking beneath arched ceilings with portraits who rarely received visitors, pausing by ancient tapestries whose woven threads hummed with forgotten magic. The castle responded to her silence with its own soft secrets. One morning, she stood before a stained glass window in the astronomy tower, a place where students seldom lingered once lessons were over. The window depicted a swirling night sky, its stars enchanted to shimmer faintly in real time. As she traced a constellation with her fingertip against the cold glass, a whisper of wind stirred behind her, though the tower door remained closed. The air seemed to murmur something inaudible, something just on the edge of knowing. She smiled. The castle was listening. That same afternoon, a choice phoned her rather than the other way around. During herbology, a fellow student accidentally tipped over a tray of young venomous tentacula seedlings. The dangerous plants stirred aggressively, their thorny tendrils seeking movement. Most students act away instantly, but Rose stepped forward, not recklessly, but calmly, and whispered not a spell, but a sound, a hum, the same low, steady tone she'd heard in her dreams. To everyone's astonishment, the plants slowed, not stopped, not tamed, but calmed enough for Professor Sprout to rush in and secure them. The professor looked at Rose with a gaze that held more than gratitude. It held wonder. "You didn't cast a charm, dear. What did you do?" she asked. Rose only replied softly, "I listened." It wasn't a lie. That moment solidified something within her, the realization that magic wasn't always expressed through spells, that maybe the wand hadn't rejected her because she was unworthy, but because she was meant to find another path, a gentler one. Her choices deepened from there. Rather than practice the loudest or most dramatic spells, she began to focus on the subtle. She explored enchantments that worked through warmth, through resonance. In the library's oldest sections, she discovered spell books not for duelists, but for caretakers, for those who mended magical fabrics, soothed restless house spirits, or calmed enchanted creatures. One evening, in the room of lost things, her secret attic, she found an old, cracked music box tucked behind a torn curtain. Most would have passed it by, but she sat with it, studied it, whispered to it, and slowly, over a few quiet days, she repaired it, not with charms, but with steady hands and attention. When it played, again, its lullaby filled the room like a memory returning home. From that point on, the attic felt different. The temperature softened. The dust no longer clung quite so stubbornly. The portraits on the shelves seemed more alert. Rose had not forced the room to change. It had responded to her presence, to the care she gave without demand. Her character, too, began to quietly influence others. A few students started lingering near her during breaks, not out of curiosity, but for the calm she brought. Even professors began to notice how her presence steadied the room. She never spoke loudly, never sought credit, but she became a quiet center, like the still eye of a storm. And the wand, still, it never cast. But it glowed sometimes, just faintly, when she made a kind choice, or comforted a classmate, or left a single wildflower on the windowsill of the hospital wing. One night, while everyone slept, she crept into the owlery and left a folded note tied to an owl's leg, a letter not to be sent, but simply given. "Thank you," it read, "for teaching me that being chosen is not the same as being loud. I think I'm beginning to understand what I was meant to be." She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. The owl fluttered once, then took off into the snow-muffled sky. Back in her room, she placed the wand gently beside her bed. No spells, no chants, just a girl who had listened and a wand that had waited. And in the hush of that winter night, the two sat quietly. No grand light, no explosion of power, just the soft magic of a connection chosen with patience. In a world filled with dazzling spells and booming displays, Rose had made her choice: to walk the quiet path, to listen more than she spoke, to trust in the kind of magic that doesn't dazzle but lingers, gently, faithfully, always. It was the last week before the spring breeze would begin to warm the edges of the snowy grounds. Hogwarts had begun its quiet shift, as it always did when winter began loosening its hold. The icicles on the greenhouses dripped slowly, and the lake shimmered with the faintest promise of movement beneath its thawing surface. Rose found herself in the attic room once more, the place that had quietly become hers, not through claiming it, but by simply being present, again and again. This time, however, something felt different the moment she stepped through the door. The air was not cold, not still, it was expectant, like something had been waiting. She crossed the creaking wooden floorboards, her boots silent, her hands wrapped gently around the old wand tucked into the sleeve of her robe. As she approached the center of the room, the enchanted music box she had repaired weeks ago began to play, all on its own. Its delicate lullaby floated softly through the air, each note shimmering like candlelight. And then, something shifted. A low hum rose from beneath the floorboards. The shelves that lined the walls gently rattled, and the scattered magical items seemed to stir, as if waking from slumber. Rose didn't move. She simply stood, heart calm, eyes wide. In the center of the room, where a broken mirror had once leaned against the wall, something new appeared. A glowing frame, not a mirror, not a window, but a magical portrait, one she had never seen before. The frame shimmered with golden vines, delicate and moving, as if stirred by a breeze only it could feel. Within the portrait, no person stood. Instead, a memory began to form, not hers, but older, ancient, yet familiar in the way dreams are familiar before you even dream them. It was a memory of another student, a girl long ago, standing in this same attic. She too held a wand that had never sparked for her. She too had been overlooked by spell and spellbook alike, but she had not been forgotten by magic. In the memory, the girl sat and listened, just as Rose had. She planted seeds of kindness, mended what was broken, sang songs to rooms that no one visited, and when the wand finally did glow, it was not in a moment of triumph or danger, but in a moment of understanding, a moment of peace. Rose watched, breath slow, as the glowing memory unfolded fully, and then came the part that made her eyes widen with wonder. The girl in the portrait looked directly at her, not past her, at her, and spoke in a voice like wind through leaves. Some wands do not choose until they are remembered. With that, the portrait shimmered and the image dissolved, leaving only soft candlelight in its place. Rose stood very still. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out the wand. It was no longer cold. It was warm, as if it had woken from a long, restful sleep. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. The attic room, every worn corner, every floating portrait, every whisper of enchanted dust, began to glow with a golden hush. A wave of magic that did not rush or explode, but pulsed outward gently, like a quiet breath. The wand, held in her hand, gave the softest tremble, not in defiance, not in testing, in greeting. The magic that moved through the room wasn't from her, and it wasn't from the wand. It was between them, a recognition, a return. Rose finally understood. This wand had chosen long ago, but not in the way others did. It had waited for someone who didn't seek it for power, but for presence. Someone who didn't try to use it, but walked beside it. She sat down on the floor, cross-legged, eyes glistening, not with tears of sadness or joy, but quiet, knowing. "Hello?" she whispered to the wand, and for the first time it pulsed gently in her hand, like a heartbeat. There was no spell spoken, no spell needed. The room responded, not with action, but with peace. The magical items settled once more. The music box slowed. A portrait of a kindly witch in the corner smiled and faded into sleep. The magic had spoken. It was quiet. It was soft, but it was real. That night, Rose didn't tell anyone, not because it was a secret, but because it was sacred. Some truths weren't meant to be announced in common rooms or shouted from library steps. Some were meant to be carried quietly, like music remembered in silence. Later that week, she passed through the great hall, unnoticed as usual, but for the first time, she didn't mind. Her fingers brushed the wand hidden inside her sleeve, and it hummed faintly, not with spellfire or enchantment, but with trust. She was no longer waiting for the wand to choose her. It already had. And in choosing patience, she had discovered the kind of magic Hogwarts rarely taught, but always whispered about in its deepest corners. The kind of magic that never needed a performance, only presence. And in that attic room, where forgotten things were given a second chance, a bond had been formed, not out of glory, but out of gentleness, and that would be enough, always. That evening, the castle seemed to exhale, not with words or grand enchantments, but with a stillness that wrapped itself around the towers and corridors like a comforting blanket. The air was quiet, not empty, just content. Rose sat quietly in her dormitory, the old wand nestled beside her pillow, no longer an artifact of mystery, nor a puzzle to be solved, but something warm and familiar, like a memory that now had a place to rest. The soft glow of candlelight flickered across the stone walls, casting gentle shadows that danced with no urgency. Her bed, tucked into the corner beneath the circular window, felt cozier than it ever had. She pulled the wool blanket up to her chin, feeling the fabric heavy and grounding, as if the bed itself understood the need for rest. Her eyes wandered to the desk, where parchment and quills sat undisturbed. There were no assignments waiting, no lessons to be prepared, just the peaceful weight of a day that had given her something more than knowledge, something quieter, understanding. Outside the window, the stars were beginning to appear, soft pinpricks of light in the velvet sky, each one holding a secret of its own. A slow breeze drifted across the grounds, rustling the leaves of the whomping willow in a rhythm far gentler than usual. Even the wind seemed to walk lighter tonight. Somewhere below, the lake shimmered under the moon, its surface rippling in long, lazy sighs. The world had not changed, but Rose had. Not loudly, not in ways anyone would see, but in the way the heart shifts when it finally hears what it was waiting for, not from outside, but from within. A gentle knock echoed from the dormitory door. It was Hermione. She peeked in with her usual calm curiosity. "Just checking on you," she said softly, not stepping further unless invited. Rose smiled and nodded. "I'm okay," she whispered. Hermione smiled back, then glanced at the wand by the pillow, her eyes soft with quiet understanding. She didn't ask good questions. She simply said, "I'm glad." And then she left, letting the door close behind her with a near-silent click. The fire in the small hearth glowed steadily, not crackling but humming, as if it too was settling into rest. Rose turned over, pressing her cheek into the cool side of the pillow. Her hand found the wand once more, not to hold it tightly, not to test it, but simply to be near it, like an old friend you sit beside without needing words. She closed her eyes. There were no spells to cast, no great mysteries to solve tonight, only the kind of peace that comes from finding what you weren't looking for, but needed all along. Outside, the moon rose a little higher. Inside, the girl who was once overlooked, once uncertain, once quietly questioning whether she belonged in a place filled with dazzling magic, she smiled in her sleep. The wand that never chose had, in its own time, in its own way, chosen someone who had chosen to wait, not because she needed to prove herself, but because she had always belonged, in her silence, in her kindness, in her stillness, and in that belonging. The wand had whispered back. All was quiet. All was well. The night deepened. Hogwarts stood still, cradled in a silence that only the castle could know, a hush not of absence but of presence, of magic gently folded in upon itself, sleeping with the stars. In the dormitory, Rose slept soundly beneath her patchwork quilt. The ancient wand rested on the nightstand beside her, no longer mysterious, no longer alone. Its wood had taken on a soft glow, as if the quiet acceptance of her heart had finally soothed its old sorrow. The moonlight poured gently through the tall windows, casting pale silver trails across the stone floor. It paused for just a moment to brush against the wand's polished handle, as though even the moon wished to say good night. Far away in the great hall, enchanted candles floated lazily above the long tables, their flames flickering in slow rhythm like breathing. The portraits along the walls had dozed off, faces calm, eyes closed. Even the suits of armor had fallen silent, their clinks and creaks gone still. The entire castle, that ancient keeper of so many stories, seemed to smile in its sleep. And high above, in the tower, where owls dreamed and stars peeked through enchanted glass, a breeze whispered through the rafters, soft, slow, and full of memory. Somewhere, a small enchanted feather floated gently downward from a windowsill, its delicate curves catching the moonlight like a lullaby in motion. It turned once, then twice, before coming to rest beside a forgotten spellbook left open on a desk. No alarms, no footsteps, just peace. Because sometimes the most magical thing isn't a flash of light or a powerful spell. Sometimes it's a quiet heart being heard, a wand that waited, a girl who listened, a night that understood. As Rose stirred gently in her sleep, the wand gave one final, sleepy shimmer, and the castle exhaled again. You are safe now. You are seen, and you are exactly where you're meant to be. Good night, dear listener. The magic will still be here in the morning.